Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us for this session today on triad advocacy competitions. And for your benefit and for my benefit as well, personal benefit, we have with us today Devashish with us. Just a second, I think Abhishek, Simran, and Yogesh, you guys are not on mute. Could you just check? Yeah. So today for dealing with trial advocacy competitions and what all goes into it, what are the nuances of trial advocacy competitions, what aspects you need to give
Jim Morris is senior.
Pratiksha, why are they not on mute?
एको मेमो पंडित जाकिच वेबिनार करे ट्रायल एडवोकेसी ऊपर करे ना वेबिनार
Pratiksha, are you there?
So,
Pratiksha, एक बार देख लेना, all those who are not muted, you can remove them from the meeting. All right, guys, please keep yourselves on mute. I really request you also that we can have a seamless session. Meanwhile, I've removed the students who were not on mute. All right. So I'll introduce our speaker for today, who I have known for a long time and who I trust for trial advocacy competitions. Whenever I need any tips, I need any guidance, I go straight out to Devashish. So Devashish is basically a fifth year student of University Law College, Utkal University in Bhubaneswar, and he's graduating this year in 2021. He has, as far as his moot court competition achievements are concerned, you will be surprised to know that he has participated in 13 national moot court competitions and 8 national trial advocacy competitions and 8 state level competitions, moot court competitions, which is a lot. I have not known anyone who has done so many moots in the span of 5 years, of course. Now he has won 2 national trial advocacy competitions also, and he has been runners up in 2 others as well. He has won 5 best memorials and 2 third best memorial awards to his credit. And he has been adjudged as the best student advocate in several moot court and trial advocacy competitions. He's one of the most active, as far as you might have already guessed, he's one of the most active members of his institution and has also organized multiple events of international and national fame as a law student. He has been invited by many law schools like School of Law in Mumbai University, Savita School of Law, CMATS Chennai, Birla Global University, and Legal Foxes to give lectures and to give sessions on and about the intricacies of moot court competitions, the nuances of drafting a trial and moot memorial, art of chief examination, which he's going to talk a lot on about, and cross examination in trial advocacy, the art of mooting and trial advocacy, and intricacies of drafting a judgment. So, from what introduction we have of Devashish today, he's going to be very, very helpful for you guys if you're interested in moot court competitions generally or trial advocacy specifically. So, without further ado, I'll just welcome with this introduction our guest speaker, Devashish. Hi, Devashish. Welcome to today's session.
Thank you, Rasnendra sir. Thank you for introducing me like so well to all the attendees.
You deserve this introduction, Devashish.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone and good evening to all of you. So before we move with today's topic, that is how to ace trial advocacy competitions, I would like to take a moment to give my heartfelt thanks to Memo Pandits, absolutely, and then Anand Gupta sir and Rachanendra Tripathi sir for having me in today's session and giving me a platform to share my experience about trial advocacy competitions. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, Devashish. We're delighted to have you amongst us. All right. So, Devashish, I'll just hit off with the first and very obvious question, of course. So, and before beginning with the intricate discussions on trial advocacy, let me just address the elephant there in the room. You have done a lot of moot court competitions, and 8 of them were trial advocacy. So please explain me and explain our viewers this heartfelt inclination towards trial advocacy. Please talk a bit about that before we begin with the main questions.
Okay, so to answer this, I would like to cite two, three primary reasons for participating in so much trial advocacy competitions. First being my keen interest in criminal law, comprising of CRPC, Code of Criminal Procedure, Indian Evidence Act, and then Indian Penal Code 1860. So from the very beginning of my law school, I was quite interested in criminal law and criminal side. And then after that, once in a national moot court, I had a chance to meet late Ramjet Malani sir, wherein while giving his speech, he said that as a budding lawyers, we should always start practicing from lower courts for 2-3 years, and then go to high courts and supreme courts eventually. So that particular thing was in my mind during my first year of law school, and then I had a chance to listen to the speech of Honorable Justice S.J. Wajibdar. He was ex-Chief Justice of Punjab and Haryana High Court, and he once said that only a trial court lawyer is a complete lawyer. A trial court lawyer is an artist, while an appeal court lawyer is an art critic. So that particular thing gave me a great inspiration or motivation per se to take part in trial advocacy competitions. And then after doing my first trial and winning it, it got me a charm of doing these particular competitions. Like the fascinating parts are chief examining a witness, cross-examining a witness particularly, and giving or closing statement in so precise manner in a very much less time. So all these things were quite fascinating for me. So altogether, because of these reasons, I was quite inclined towards trial advocacy competitions apart from national moot courts.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the statement which you said, which you heard from someone, that trial advocacy lawyer is the artist and the appellate lawyers are the art critics. I think this will stay with me, and I'm going to quote this statement every time I explain the difference between a trial advocacy lawyer and the other kind. So, as you guys have understood, trial advocacy is basically required if you want to excel in basic core litigation, how a case proceeds, how a case is developed also. Then you need to have an inclination towards trial advocacy, and you can know much more about how a case goes on, how a case is formed before it goes to court and before the arguments happen. So all of that is trial advocacy. Of course, Debashish is going to be elaborating on that. So, Debashish, the second question which we have for you is that, let's just begin with the first aspect, the team composition. Whenever you are tackling a moot, whenever you are approaching a moot, framing a team holds a very great significance when it comes to the synergy between a team. So is there anything which you need to keep in mind while choosing a team when it comes to trial advocacy competitions?
Yeah, absolutely. As you rightly pointed out, that team composition is extremely important for winning a trial advocacy competition, or at least doing better in that particular competitions. So there are a few pointers that I would like to mention to the attendees. So the first one being that you have to prepare a team having compatibility with each other, right? If you are not comfortable with each other, then you cannot cope up for 2-3 months of preparation stage, and even in those 3-4 days of trial advocacy competition or any competition. So you must have compatibility and comfortability between three of you between each other. And then secondly, all team members must give their heart and soul to that particular competition. Like there are many instances and my prior experiences that two of the team members would be hardworking members of that team, and one member would be so lethargic that he wouldn't even know the facts of that particular case until the competition day. So a team shouldn't be like that. All the three members must be on same page, must give their equal efforts, must be hardworking. If at all they are like aiming to win a particular competition. So you guys like frame a team who are willing to give their heart and soul to that particular competition.
Correct.
And then thirdly, always experience matters in trial advocacy competitions. As I said, with due experience, you will learn the art of cross-examining a particular witness, how to handle a witness who is resilient or aggressive towards your questions, and how to maintain your demeanor and be calm with a particular situation where things are not going as per your aspirations or as per your plannings. So that particular thing comes with experience. So if you have a team member who has prior experience of trial advocacy or have prior experience of or prior knowledge of particular criminal law, that is CRPC, IPC, and evidence, then it will surely be a plus pointer for your team. So if you are a first year student, then you can approach to a senior, of course, for participating with you or teaching you the intricacies of trial advocacy competitions. Uh, uh, but nowadays, I have come across teams who are framed by their mock trial or intra trial, or we can say challenger rounds in their law school. So I don't know if all these factors will be considered by them or not. But if at all you are independent and you are you can frame your own team, then you can consider these pointers.
Of course, the synergy needs to play a very big role. I completely agree. When three come together, the output of the work should increase. And if even one of the member is not as energetic, as enthusiastic, it's a huge cost on the entire team. Completely.
Absolutely.
So once we are done with the team, the second step. Now we're going to take it step by step, so that it is easier for the participants to understand. Once the team is formed, the second option is that we register for the moot, and then the moot proposition is released. So my second question is actually more focused on the moot proposition. What I felt is the how you approach a proposition in a trial advocacy is very different from how we approach a conventional moot proposition. So I want to know how is that different from you when it comes to the two moot propositions, and how to tackle them. When it comes to tackling a moot proposition and a trial advocacy, how do you frame issues if the issues are not there, and what is the approach of framing arguments from the moot proposition? If you can.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely, there is a clear difference between our conventional moot, national moot court competitions and trial advocacy competitions per se. The first one being mock trial differs from moot courts in the way that moot court practices appellate court system or appellate argument system. And so involves no handling of evidences or examination of witnesses, but rather it exercises in legal research or oral advocacy more importantly. So this is the clear difference between mock trial and a national moot court competition, that in trial advocacy competitions, you will have a lot of stages to deal with. You have to examine witnesses, you have to accumulate and corroborate evidences, prove their credibility and all. But in national moot courts, you will have an admitted set of facts. You have to just deal with a particular principle of law and then argue upon that particular set of facts and set of law. So in that particular scenario, you don't have to deal with evidences, you don't have to examine witnesses and all.
I'll just so in the conventional moots, the facts which we are given are settled facts. But when it comes to trial advocacy, those facts are yet to be framed, because we need to talk to the witnesses, we need to see the evidence. So the fact framing is also yet to be done. Okay, great.
Yeah,
so how do you approach this proposition when it comes to understanding the facts and making arguments from those facts?
Yeah. So first of all, you must know that in trial advocacy competitions, you will get a trial proposition having 60-70 pages at max. So you have to read all the pages clearly, and you have to remember all the facts, and must try to discuss all those facts thoroughly with your teammates. Right. So as there are a lot of facts to deal with, as there are a lot of evidences, as there are a lot of reports, you will get 161 statements of witnesses, you will get FIR, you will get charge sheet, you will get different kinds of reports like expert opinion or fingerprint report, handwriting expert report, or medical report, forensic examination report, ballistic report. There are many kinds of reports. So there would be an amalgamation of lot of things in your trial proposition. So you have to clearly understand and break down your facts. And also always try, like I personally do this with my teammates, that I thoroughly and read that particular trial problem almost every day till the date of the competition, so that I remember all the facts. I remember where is this particular report is in trial proposition whenever asked by a judge to refer to it, or if any question comes to you by the bench regarding a particular fact of that case, then you can answer it instantly. And then again, all your teammates must be on same page regarding the fact sheet of the trial proposition, as it is quite a lengthier proposition in comparison with the conventional moot courts, because they hardly contain 10 to 15 pages of a moot proposition or fact sheet. So you have to discuss them thoroughly and you have to remember them. And the thing that I personally do is to break down the facts in a flowchart manner, or you can say a date sheet manner, or you can do a diagrammatic representation of your fact sheet. Suppose on these days, suppose 1/1/2021, there was a dispute, or there was an argument, heated argument between A and B. Then on 5th of that month, B came to A and gave a blow on his stomach, and then he instantly died. In between that, there would be a fact that B was knowing that he has a swollen liver or swollen stomach. Oh. And then fourth thing, there would be that after he knew that after giving a blow that A will die, and there will be a set of facts given in your trial proposition. So you have to divide them and make them or convert them into a flow chart, so that you will absolutely remember the line of facts or the flow of facts that is there mentioned in your trial proposition. Then the second thing you must keep in your mind while reading a trial proposition or facts of that proposition is to develop a theory and find loopholes in that particular trial proposition. Right now, when I say develop a theory, I mean that there are two types of theories in a trial competition. First of all, that is prosecution theory, and second one would be your defense version, right? So prosecution theory is a theory that you will develop or try to prove from the side of prosecution that this is our theory and this is the absolute theory without any loopholes, without any contradictions, and that is why the defense or the accused person is guilty for the particular crime. And the second thing that I said is a defense version. So defense version would be your own defense story or your own defense theory, which will portray that there are loopholes in prosecution's case, and what prosecution is saying is completely wrong, is completely invalid, and the way I am saying or the way or the theory I am posing is the correct one, and that is why the accused is not guilty or accused should be acquitted. So while reading down your moot proposition, you must try to develop what are you trying to actually prove in your oral rounds or in your closing arguments. So it will eventually develop. It will eventually develop as whenever you read a particular moot proposition and as many times you read it. So you have to make your both the theories the strongest one, so that you can tackle or you can fight against the opposite team in your competition. Now, after doing this, you must also try to find out loopholes. Now, when I say loopholes, I would like to give you one example that in one of my trial advocacy competitions, there would be a charge sheet, obviously. So in the charge sheet, it was, or in the FIR, it was not mentioned that the arrest of this particular accused person was informed to his relatives, right? Now, in this particular case, section 41B of CRPC would come into play, which states that if a police officer is arresting someone, then he has an absolute duty to inform to a relative of that accused person. Now, in our case, as that particular field was blank, and it was not said yes or no or anything like that. So this can be considered as a loophole. This can be considered as a statutory loophole, you can say, and which will obviously be in your favor. So while reading down your facts, you must find out loopholes. What are the loopholes in your moot proposition or trial proposition, and note them down in your Word file or in your notepad, like whichever way you follow. So this strategy is particularly should be followed by you while reading down your trial proposition.
And the arguments should also be framed in a manner that when prosecution is framing arguments, his story should be impeccable. Like there is no single point of doubt which can be raised on the story, on my version of story. And when it comes to the defense, his arguments will be more on the lines of finding loopholes and telling the court how this story is not that reliable. All right, great. That's
Absolutely.
that's a wonderful understanding on how to frame arguments actually. And when it comes to reading the facts, always have an open mind. From what Debashi said, don't stick to the facts as they are given in the trial advocacy moot proposition. All right, I guess it helps a lot. Now when
Yes. Also,
yeah,
I would like to interrupt here that as you said, the given facts are not settled. So you must always keep it in your mind that all the facts given in your trial proposition are yet to be settled before the court by way of chief examination or by way of cross examination. So you should not take those facts admitted priorly. So you should be like in a notion that you will either prove those facts given in your trial proposition from the prosecution side, or will disprove those facts given in the trial proposition from the defense side. So as Rachnendra sir said, you should be flexible with that and should have an open mind while like noting down or reading down your trial proposition.
absolutely correct. And Devashish, please feel free to call me Rajnendra. Matlab, it's okay. Uh, in fact, if there's someone who should be calling sir, it should be me right now to you. I should be addressing you as Devashish sir. Acha. Devashish, my next question was actually on ethics and etiquettes of trial advocacy. But before that, because we were talking on trial advocacy proposition and framing of arguments, so I just need to, if you can just carry that forward and tell our viewers what are the steps, how is the process of making a moot memorial different when it comes to a conventional moot and when it comes to a trial advocacy, because from what I know there are a lot of things which need to be attached, which and the way of drafting the arguments is also slightly different. It's more fact oriented, not much law oriented. So please throw some light on how to make the memorials in a trial.
I Yes, absolutely. The basic difference between a trial memorial and a moot court, national moot court memorial, is that in trial advocacy memorials you will have a section that is statement of charges instead of statement of issues, which we generally have in our national moot court competitions. Now, in many instances, I have seen people addressing this particular section a statement of issues or a set of issues or issues raised. But I would like to clarify that in trial court scenario or in trial advocacy competitions, it is always statement of charges and not statement of issues. So why I am saying statement of charges is because of the fact that a accused person is charged with a particular offense or charged with a set of offenses. So now you must be wondering as to what are charges. Now charges are something which are labeled against the accused person, or the offenses which are attached, or uh, like accusations were made against the accused persons, but per se. Now, like for example, I would say that Mr. A is labeled, or the sections that are mentioned against him are section 302, 307, etc. So these 302, 307, 120B or any other section per se for your trial proposition from the Indian Penal Code would be a charge against the accused person. So now in this particular section, you have to divide the charges that are mentioned in the final report or the charge sheet, as we say, in your moot memorial in like separate sections. So first of all, like as I said, first section or first charge is 302, right? So you can say that Mr. A or Mr. A1 have been charged under section 302 of Indian Penal Code 1860 for the crime of murder of Mr. Y. So this would be your charge 1. Then you have to mention charge 2, that is 307. So likewise, you have to repeat and say that Mr. A is charged under section 307 for attempt to murder of Mr. Y, and likewise. So there would be many number of charges. So you have to divide this particular section separately, like charge 1, charge 2, and charge 3. Now here a catch is there that if two provisions are similar, like if we say take 120B and 34, they are almost of a similar nature, like conspiracy or conspiring against somebody. So you can take both those charges in a single statement, so that it will be easier for you to prove in your memorial and then again take up in your closing arguments. So if there are two sections which are similar to each other and they are not quite distinct with each other, then you can take them together up in a particular charge or statement of charge. Likewise, if there is grievous hurt and hurt for 323 or 324, 326, so they are of similar nature, almost similar nature. So you can take all of them in a single statement. You need not divide them separately. So the major charges would be divided separately, but interrelated charges can be taken up in a single statement. So it would be your statement of charges in memorials per se. Also, while drafting your memorials, you have to give your facts and connect. You have to give your facts in a precise manner and connect the dots between the facts given, between the law involved, and between the evidences posed by you, and what are the things that you are relying upon. Now, suppose, as I said, we are dealing with a case of murder or robbery, right? So if you are contending from the side of the prosecution, then you have to give an example in your memorial at the end of that particular charge, or at the end of that particular sub charge or sub issue that you are taking up. That Mr. A is Mr. A should be guilty of section 302 because it is quite corroborated and it is quite inferred from the statement given by the ocular witness or sole eyewitness Mr. A, and the evidence of the post-mortem report given by Mr. Z, and the ballistic report or any other report that you are referring to, or the CCTV or electronic evidence that has been given by Mr. Mr. D. And likewise, you have to connect your that last para or the conclusion part of that particular charge, so that you have to connect the facts, you have to connect all the evidences which will lead you to prove that okay, Mr. A is guilty of this particular charge. You have to mention the statement of witnesses also in that particular thing. So you have to connect and conclude likewise in in your memorial per se. Now, in this particular scenario, as I said, the fact sheets or the statements are not conclusive or are not admitted, right? So you have to, as I said, you have to prepare a theory like, okay, Mr. A will go to the podium and while chief examination, I will personally, while examining, I will extract this particular fact from him. And if this particular fact is extracted, then I can take it in then the court can take it as admissible evidence and I can use it in closing argument. So you have to like assume and pre-plan that thing and then put it down in your memorial, so that it will be a synchronized form or synchronized thought process of yours, which will be put down in between 15 pages or 20 pages, which will be helpful for you in your oral rounds. So this thing you should always remember. And then for your memorials, you should also remember to follow the IRAC rule, which we generally follow in our like moot courts. That is issues, then what is the rule pertaining to that particular issue, and then assessment of facts, as I said, and then a conclusion. The way I said, you must put that particular thing in your memorials. Now also, while framing your memorials, you can mention the loopholes that are there in your particular moot proposition. Now there are few strategies we make. Like if in your moot court competition, it is not mandatory for you to give your moot memorial, or it is not there is no prize money for your like best memorial or something. Then we tend to do this, that we write down all the loopholes, all the arguments, all the evidences that we are taking up. But sometimes you can skip these things, you can skip intricate things and hide it within yourself, so that opposite party cannot know it beforehand, that what strategy or what particular thing you would apply in the oral rounds. As you know that memorial exchange round happens before our oral rounds, so it will be quite like secret for you, secret weapon for you to attack on the opposite party, and he wouldn't be apprehensive of that from your like trial memorial. So there are few strategies you have to make while like framing your memorials. Like, okay, this thing I can say, this particular argument I shouldn't give, so that it will be a surprise for the opposite party and he couldn't tackle it in rebuttal or something like that. So you have to prepare it like it is.
And so my question I have a follow-up question. Like in all the other moots which I've did, if you do not include an argument in the moot memorial per se, you are not allowed to argue it. You may have to seek the judge's permission. So what do you mean when you say that you can, kind of hide some argument, and then so that you have a better time to place that argument in front of the bench? Could you please give an example or just explain this?
Yeah, absolutely. Now in criminal trial per se, even in real courts, it is not mandatory for you to give every argument that you want to pose before the bench. There are certain arguments which you can keep secret for using it later on while the actual stage comes up. So you can keep those facts. Now it doesn't mean that you will skip the whole argument thing. Like if you are dealing with 302 and you will skip the postmortem thing, you will skip medical report, you will skip the particular para or particular part of the witness's statement or something like that. You can do that. You cannot completely skip a particular thing. You will give an argument, but you will hide a certain part which is much important, but which is also ignorable on the part of the judges, which they cannot take into account per se, and which is interrelated with something that you were like making a point in your memorial, so that you can say that, okay, this particular thing is not written, but this can be inferred from the fact that I have written in my memorial. So you can obviously tackle this particular thing, if at all judges question it.
And so because you do not want the other party to be better prepared when it comes to the cross-examination part. So yeah,
absolutely.
Completely. I got it. So but now the question which I had skipped for this question, the memorial making question, what is the, because there's a stark difference when it comes to the demeanor which you hold while conducting yourself in a trial advocacy versus while conducting yourself in a conventional mood. You got to be very poised, you got to maintain that calm and composed attitude which cannot be stressed more. So what is the difference between the attitude and the etiquettes, court etiquettes and the demeanor when it comes to a trial advocacy mood competition? Obviously you cannot be harsh on the judge, but there are certain differences which I want you to address.
Absolutely. So now almost everything is similar. Almost all the etiquettes and ethics are similar to the moot court competitions that we should raise yourself when judges enter to the courtroom. You should go down and you should take permission before like going to the podium and starting with your opening statement or any other stage, or you have to introduce your co-counsel before like starting your opening statement and all. So all these things will be quite similar with the national moot court competitions. But there is one like hairline difference that I would like to say is that in moot court competition you have to be the most humblest person appearing before the judge. You have to be like absolute calm. You have to like give your arguments in a slow pitch, in a slow manner, and in a complete like a you can say a treat to the eyes way to the judges in moot courts. But in trial advocacy competitions, you can be a bit aggressive, not on judges, but on witnesses, of course, because you cannot be harsh on judges and you cannot like shout on them or scream on them. So sometimes it happens that a witness would be a witness who is either too cunning or who is giving here and there answers to your questions. So you can be a bit aggressive on him so that you can extract your particular answer. But don't be like, I would say, don't be too aggressive. Don't like enter into arguments with your witnesses. Try to ask him different, if you at all like fall in this situation, try to ask him different questions in different way with a different tone of your questions, so that he will at the end of the day break down and give you the desired answer. So you can be aggressive, but don't enter into argument with that particular witness, because that will be a minus point for your for your part of marks. And then again in moot courts, as we don't use yeah or yes or okay, so don't use all these words in trial advocacy competitions. Also you have to use indeed, much obliged, highly obliged, or if you don't know answer to a particular question, then you can beg pardon to the judge. So it will be quite similar with the format of moot court competitions. Also, there are 2 things that I would like to say in this ethics or etiquettes thing. There is a point, or there is a situation where you can raise objections in trial advocacy competitions while your oral rounds. Right now, suppose the opposite counsel is asking a leading question. I would obviously say what is leading question and all in later part of this webinar. But you can obviously raise a question, raise an objection if a particular opposite counsel is asking a leading question by saying that you rise and say that objection, leading questions to the judge. So judge will know that, okay, the opposite counsel is asking leading questions in chief examination part, which is not allowed to you. So that objection will obviously fetch you an additional mark. So you must like keep it in your mind. Then there are few other objections, suppose the opposite counsel is arguing with your witness or asking him the same question repeatedly or asking him derogatory questions. Then you can rise and say badgering the witness. This is the objection, badgering the witness. So this will again also fetch you a mark. And there are also moot court, there are also trial advocacy competitions that I have faced wherein the opposite party asks irrelevant questions in cross examination. Like he will ask whether you have
Sorry, yeah, carry on.
like he will ask that whether you have ate curd in your like breakfast. So it is obviously irrelevant to your trial procedure or that trial court scenario. So you can raise and say that irrelevant question. You will just rise and say irrelevant question or objection, irrelevant questions. So the court will obviously notice these objections when you are like involved in that particular oral round. Also, there are few tricks that I personally follow while while appearing in oral rounds, that I ask the IO. If there is IO, there will obviously be IO, investigating officer, in your case.
Please let them know what an IO is. I don't want anyone
Yes.
to miss out.
Absolutely. So IO is referred to investigating officer who basically carries on the complete investigation of a particular case or particular complaint, you say, or particular FIR given in a particular police station or particular jurisdiction. So when IO or investigating officer is appearing for his testimony or for deposition, I always say him that whenever you enter to the room, as obviously witnesses will not be there in your room, in the courtroom, they will be outside the courtroom or that particular setup of the room in that trial advocacy competition, and they will be called upon whenever you ask for a particular witness. So when IO comes, I always say that give a salute to the judges. That gives an impression of a real court scenario. Like you must have noticed, or you will obviously notice whenever you go to trial court for internship or any other work, you will see that whenever IO is examined and he enters to the courtroom, he will salute and just do that posture to the judge. So that gives an impression that okay, this lawyer or this particular team is well aware with these small techniques of a particular trial. So I always suggest that IO to come and then salute. So you guys can also try that particular thing.
I think this is a brilliant tip which you have given to all of these. Had I known such methods of presenting yourself in a court, I would have definitely tried my hand at a trial advocacy, because standing up in a courtroom and saying objection was the only reason why I chose to do law. But yeah, that's a very good answer, and certainly these tips will help all of you who are going to, with Devashish's experience, all these nitty-gritties. When he just pointed it out, when the IO enters the room, he asks him to salute the court, because that's the reverence which flows from the police to the judiciary. All these small points you won't know from anyone else, but from someone who has a very good practice of trial advocacy. So again, thanks a lot, Devashish, for such minute answers. Now, just a second.
Sir, I would also like to interrupt here. There is another point. For suppose I am chief examining a prosecution witness who is a complainant or or victim's father or deceased's father. So you can ask him to answer in an emotional way. Like it will give you a real court scenario, right? So you cannot just come, the witness cannot just come and say in an aggressive tone with a pride that my daughter died and he killed my daughter with this and that, we have a fight and all. So you cannot say outrightly these things to the court, being the father of the victim or deceased. So you have to maintain a low speech. You have to be quite emotional. You can be dramatic of crying or very much emotional as your daughter has died and all. So teams must also say these things while briefing the witnesses. Like if someone is doing the role of complainant or the father of complainant or father of the deceased, then he can try these things. These things obviously give impression to the judges that okay, the team is trying to keep this particular, this is a simulated court obviously, but he is trying to make this a real court scenario. Even as a recent instance, I remember that when I have participated in law trial advocacy competition, I have asked my the accused person. As I was on behalf of defense, I was representing defense. I asked the accused person to give his statement, and then just hold his hands and say that I am innocent, your lordship, I am innocent, madam judge, I have not committed any crime, in a slow voice, in a minor speech. So this will obviously again create an impression that okay, this accused is begging that he has not done anything, he is innocent or like that. So these little things gives a great impression, impact, create a great impact on judges.
Absolutely. Devashish, you are no short of becoming a trial advocate anytime soon. Let me tell you that. All these things you are doing in a moot court competition, they are going to fetch you a bit far. Okay. So Devashish, now the main question of this session, of this entire session of what trial advocacy basically entails. The soul of trial advocacy lies while you examine the witness and when you conduct the cross examination of the witness. So all the viewers, if you want to take out the most important aspect of this session, this is going to be it helps a lot to know the intricacies of examination in chief and cross examination. This is what you do with the witness. You examine the witness will tell you something, and then that thing will go on record and it will become a fact subject to its acceptance of the court. So Devashish is now going to explain us the intricacies of examining a witness and then cross-examining a witness. Devashish, please take the stage.
Yes, absolutely. So now section 137 of Indian Evidence Act provides for the provision of chief examination, cross-examination and re-examination of witnesses. Right. So you guys can note it down, that section 137, and can later on read it, that what is actually 137 for you. So and another thing I would like to point out in like trial advocacy competitions or a real court scenario, that section 138 plays a great role. Section 138 of Indian Evidence Act, which says that the manner in which the witnesses will be examined, right? So the witnesses shall be first examined in chief, and then if the adverse party desires, be cross-examined firstly. So this is the serial that should be mostly followed in a real trial court in trial advocacy competitions. But it also depends on the rules of that competition. Sometimes they give that you have to chief examine all the witnesses, and then the opposite party will cross-examine in a bulk to the witnesses serially. In some competitions, they will follow section 138 and they will say that, okay, you will chief examine A, then the opposite party will cross-examine A. Then again, you will chief examine B, the opposite party will cross-examine B. So these two formats are mostly followed in trial advocacy competition. So you have to be thorough with your rules of the competition per se, and if not given there, then ask the convener to know that okay, what is the procedure of examining the witnesses in that particular competition. Now, apart from cross examination and chief examination, there are two other important stages from the point of view of trial advocacy competitions, that are opening statement and closing statement. Now, I have already dealt with how you can give your closing statement. As I said, you have to make your facts and arguments precisely, and also in closing arguments, you will get very less time to give your arguments. You will get hardly 5-10 minutes to sum up your arguments. So you should not delve much into case law, because trial courts are courts of facts. They are not court of law. So you should deal with facts and the relevant law or relevant evidences which are flowing from those particular facts, and then pursue the court or prove your point, corroborate your point in your favor, be it from prosecution or be it from defense. So you shouldn't delve into case laws in detail, because you will have a less time. And then also in trial advocacy competitions, you cannot always prepare a existing speech. You cannot be pre-prepared. You cannot pre-prepare your arguments, right? As in moot courts, you have a complete set of facts which are admissible. You can prepare your arguments, you can rehearse them, and you have to just say them exactly as you have prepared before the bench in moot courts. But in trial advocacy competitions, there will obviously be a bit of subjectivity. You might need to reframe your arguments. You might need to introduce or inculcate something new, you might have to delete something, because your closing argument will totally depend upon the conduct of the proceeding in that particular session. You cannot go beyond that. Like if you haven't exhibited a particular evidence, suppose you haven't exhibited a medical report, then you cannot take reference of that medical report in your closing statement, because that particular thing is not admitted or corroborated by the relevant witness. So you have to keep all these things in your mind while giving your closing argument. Now, I would like to give a brief introduction or brief thing about opening statement. In opening statement for prosecution, you have to basically give the background of your case, what is why what are the facts which led you to appear before this court, and then you have to say that what all evidences are there which you are going to submit, what all witnesses you will examine in your chief examination, and how these particular charges, what are the charges leveled against the accused and all. Like, you should not delve into the arguments part. That will be done in your closing argument. So you shouldn't do that in your opening statement. That is for opening statement for prosecution. And then for opening statement of defense, you should outrightly say that I vehemently deny all the charges leveled against the accused persons which are untrue and not relevant, and all other evidences that the prosecution is trying to pose before this court are also concocted and fabricated and all. And likewise, you have to just cook up a story and say on behalf of the defense. So that's all for the opening statement from prosecution and defense. Now we shall deal with the chief examination of witnesses, right? So also you must remember that most trial advocacy competitions are based on criminal trial or criminal law. So you won't find a civil law problem or something like that. So you must be a master of IPC, CRPC and Evidence Act. So now, as I said, 137 deals with chief examination. I would like to explain this particular chief examination part by giving you an example. So let's take a hypothetical situation wherein it was alleged by the prosecution that Mr. Tejas has killed one Mr. Saurabh at around 7 p.m. on 9 September 2020 in the sugarcane field of the deceased, while he was resting there after a hectic day work, and one Balbir has seen Tejas killing Saurabh. Right? We have Saurabh here, we have Tejas here. Saurabh has killed Tejas and Balbir has seen him killing him in his fields. Right. So now let's assume that I am the public prosecutor. Also, like in few moot court competition, they ask you the provision of who is a public prosecutor and how he is appointed. Right. So you must remember that section 24 of CRPC speaks about the appointment of public prosecutors and special public prosecutors. So you should know the provision of appointment of public prosecutors and all. Also, you should remember that how a defense counsel is appointed, right? He will be appointed by giving or registering a Bakalatnama. So the provision for Bakalatnama in CRPC would be 303 of CRPC, which provides for appointment of a counsel to defend a particular arrested person or particular person. So sometimes judges ask these basic questions to you. So you must remember all these provisions. So yeah, I was saying that let's assume that I am the public prosecutor, right? So I will obviously call Balbir, being the sole eyewitness of the case or the crime, to the witness box to substantiate the allegations or to corroborate the facts of the case, to bring out the guilt of the accused, right? So the flow of the questions that I should ask while chief examining him would be like this. The first one being, please introduce yourself to the court for the record. In this particular question here, the witness will give his details and the court will record the same. Like, I am Balbir Singh, aged 54 years, father's name is this, address is this, and my occupation is I am a farmer. So the court will record these basic things. Then the next question would be that I put to you will ask your own witness that how you know the accused and the deceased, and to which he will answer that I know them very well, or as well, where as we all of were staying in the same village and are neighbors. So in this manner, in this process, you have to build up your case or build up your facts. that okay, he is the witness, he is the eyewitness, who is he, how he is related to the accused and deceased persons, and why he is appearing before the court to testify. So the next question would be that what you were doing on 9th of September, right? Because the 9th of September is the date of murder. So obviously he will reply that uh, it was a busy day as well as always, and he was working in his sugarcane fields throughout the day, right? So after that, I will ask what happened on 9th September, to which he will describe the occurrence or describe the incident in a detailed manner, wherein he will say that, okay, I have seen Mr. Tejas or the accused person while killing Saurabh in Saurav's field at around 7 p.m. while returning from my field to my home. And it was a like Purnima day, and it was quite bright, and I can clearly recognize Tejas killing the accused, killing the deceased person. So in this way, you have to build up your facts in your chief examination by directly examining your own witness. So after he deposes this particular thing or particular sentences and stands or corroborates the 161 statement, his particular deposition before the court will be taken as an admissible evidence, if at all it is not said or not detached by the defense by his cross examinations, right? Also, you guys must remember, while chief examining the witnesses, to exhibit documents which are given in your trial proposition before the court. Now, in some uh, trial advocacy competitions, you will see that you will be getting 20-30 minutes for chief examination. So you use that particular time to elaborately deal with your chief examination part and exhibit all the evidences, ask all the relevant questions, bring out all the relevant facts which are required to you, which you can take up while you're closing argument. Because as I said, if you don't bring certain thing before the court, you cannot take that thing in your closing arguments, or cannot refer, or cannot have a support of that particular thing in your closing argument. So you have to bring everything. Now, in certain moot court competitions, you will get 5-10 minutes or very less for chief examination. So in that case, what you can do is that the counsel who is appearing for chief examination, he can just come, and before starting the stage, he can say that your lordship or ladyship may kindly take all the exhibits that are mentioned in the trial proposition as exhibited by the prosecution, and the prosecution will then proceed with the developing the relevant facts before this court in by questioning the witnesses in chief examination stage. By saying that, what the court will notice is that it will take all the exhibits in your favor, or it will take all the exhibits in account, and you need not exhibit all those documents separately to separate witnesses in your chief examination stage. Now, suppose, for example, there is a seizure, like a seizure witness, and there is a seizure list, and you call upon him for chief examination. So you have to just this particular document, you have to show him the seizure list and ask him whose signature is there, who has given this particular statement, or who was present during the seizure by the police. And obviously, the witness will say that yes, this is my signature. I was present while the investigating officer was seizing this and this from the spot. And likewise, he will prove that particular seizure document. So now this particular seizure document is admitted, or is exhibited before the court. And you can obviously take this document in your closing argument in your favor. So you always remember this process, that you have to exhibit all your documents by showing them, or by creating a relevant or relevance with the particular witness and the document. And then you have to just say that your lordship may kindly exhibit this particular seizure document as exhibit A or exhibit B, or whatever exhibit that you are doing for your trial proposition or trial examination. So this is the thing that you must remember while chief examination of your witnesses. Sir, you were saying something.
No, Devashish, I can't be more sorry for the fact that we are running a bit out of time. So can you please, elaborate on the cross-examination part and
Okay.
the trips of it? Because I'm really sorry, man.
No issue, sure.
Because,
So now I have already said intricacies
Yeah,
of
we've
chief
explained,
examination thing and importance. So now while cross examination, you cannot expect a witness to say say a particular thing in your own way. So you must have to ask him, or like keep on asking him something which is really relevant for establishing your case in a different manner. Like as I said in previous situation, let's assume that particular case and I am the defense counsel appearing on behalf of the accused. So I will cross-examine Balbir to extract the real truth or test the veracity of that particular witness, right? So now the flow of questions that would be like this. Like I put to you, you can always start your question by I put to you, or is it true, or I ask you that. By using these phrases, you can always start your cross-examination questions. So for example, the first question would be, I put to you that it was a new moon day on 9th September. As I said, he stated that it was a full moon day. And if it is a new moon day and he accepts that, then obviously he cannot see in a village area that who is killing whom, right? So your first question would be, I put to you that it was a new moon day on 9th September. So if he agrees to that, then you say that point to be noted, your lordship. So this particular thing will be accepted or noted by the court. Then second question, you can put to him that is it true that there are no street lights available near Saurabh's field? Again, it will add to your case if he agrees that okay, there were no lights and the witness is telling complete false thing, that he has seen the accused person killing the deceased. And then again you will say that you can ask, I put to you that you were more than 30 meters away from the crime scene. So you see that these questions lead to you to the same objective, that this particular witness has not seen the happening of the crime or seen the accused killing the deceased person, right? So in any of the, if he denies to the first question, you can come up with the second question in a different manner, so that at the end of the day he will get frustrated and say that no, there are no like street lights near the Saurabh fields. Then obviously it is contradicting his statement that he has seen the accused person killing the deceased, right? So in this manner you have to prove your cross-examination case. Now always remember while cross-examining that what is your ultimate objective, what do you want to extract, or what do you want to contradict from that particular witness, right? As I have just said in the previous situation. So you have to always aim at a particular thing and try to achieve that particular object by asking different questions. Now always, while like cross-examining, always try to be composed. As I said, don't argue with the witness because it will be a minus point for you. And also always try to give a suggestion at the end of your cross-examination. Now suppose after cross-examining Balbir, I would say that Mr. Balbir, I would like to suggest that you are like telling completely false thing before the honorable court, and you have yourself killed the deceased person, and you are like shifting the blame on the accused person. So this is a kind of suggestion which you can give to a witness at the end of your cross-examination. Now, what is the importance of giving a suggestion to the court? It will bring to the notice of the court that, okay, this is the story of the defense counsel. He is trying to shift, or he is trying to say that this eyewitness has only killed the deceased person and not the accused person. So it will be in the notice of the court. And you can obviously use this thing in your closing arguments. So you should always remember that. Now, also there are few tips that I would like to give for better cross-examinations. The first and foremost tip, as I already stated, you must be master of your facts. Like you must know all the bits of facts that are provided to you in your trial proposition, and also the master of law, the laws which are concerned or which are related to your moot proposition. Now suppose if a moot trial proposition is dealing with NDPS, Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, so you must be thorough with the provisions of that particular act, how the procedure of investigation is mentioned there, what are the statutory mandates provided there in NDPS Act. So you must know all these things so that you can in a better way cross-examine a particular witness. Now, for example, I would like to say that in most NDPS cases, you will read eventually that they bring stock witnesses, but the provision is to bring independent witnesses in NDPS Act. So if a stock witness has been brought by the investigating officer and the prosecution is bringing him for chief examination, then you can obviously state that you have appeared for narcotics bureau for 150 times. So he will say, no, I have appeared for 15-20 times. So here, this particular witness is demolished by the way that he has already appeared for this particular narcotics bureau for 15-20 times. So how can a court will rely on his testimony before the court, right? So in this way, you have to be the master of the facts as well as master of that particular law concerned in your trial proposition. Now, as I said, you have always should know the objective of your cross examination and what you want to extract, or how you want to demolish, or how you want to say that this particular witness is untrustworthy before the court. So you should always remember that and prepare your questions and also additional questions that may follow. Like I always, as I gave an example, I asked one question. If he agrees to that, then I will stop asking those follow-up questions, because my objective is already established that he has not seen the crime happening, right? So you have to always prepare your follow-up questions with the main questions and the main object that you want to establish from the cross-examination. Now again, as I said, you shouldn't be more aggressive or argue with the witnesses, but you should always ask your questions confidently and with command. It shouldn't be like, okay, Mr. X, I would like to say, don't say like this in a slow speech, or like something you are sympathizing with that witness or something like that. You should have a command over your voice and you should be confident while asking your questions, so that the witness will fear to tell you something wrong or fear to tell you something lie. Also, you should remember to ask short and crisp questions. Don't ask questions which are lengthy, like 3-4 lines. Don't ask such lengthier questions, because the court will not understand that, the witness will not understand that, and it will eventually be a loss of your time, because it is always a time restriction in your trial advocacy competitions, and even in real courts also it is applicable. Don't ask lengthier questions. Always try to keep your question short and crisp while asking them, and in a plain language, which will be helpful for witness to understand and easily answer them. Because in that situation, the witness cannot, okay, this is a strategy that I follow and ask my witnesses to do that. I personally say my witnesses that if the opposite party will cross-examine you, you just delay him. You just delay his time by repeatedly saying that I couldn't understand your question. Please repeat it. What are you saying? Okay, and I couldn't understand. Can you please make it simpler or shorter? So by this, my witnesses try to deviate him or irritate the opposite party. Like this strategy I personally follow during my rounds. So you can also try that. So that is why if your questions are short and simpler, obviously the witness cannot say that I couldn't understand your question, and the court will obviously then charge upon him and ask him to give answer and not to delay the procedure, right?
Yeah.
So you should always keep your questions short and crisp and in plain language. Then you can ask leading questions in your cross examinations. Of course, you should always try to ask leading questions in your cross examination. Now the questions that I said or gave example to you, they are the example of leading questions. I would also I can also give another example, like saying that Mr. X, you were present on 9 September on the field of Tejas, right? So this question is leading the witness to give a particular answer in yes or no. So that is why this type of questions are called leading questions, and which you obviously cannot ask in chief examination. It is a bar in the Indian evidence law that you cannot ask you cannot ask a leading question in your chief examinations. In chief examinations, you have to ask simple questions which are not leading, right? So you should always ask leading questions in your cross examination, so that witness will be led to give a desired answer of your choice. Now also make a habit to listen the witnesses carefully, because what he is answering to you is very much important. Like if he gave you a correct answer that you wanted from him, then stop there and don't ask repeated questions on that particular thing, because that by asking repeated questions you will destroy your own case. So you must always listen to the witness as to what he is saying. If he is giving any answer not relevant or not favoring you, then you should ask another question by applying your presence of mind and flexibility and all. If he is giving a favorable answer, then stop then and there and ask another question which is relevant. So you should always have a listening habit and listen carefully to the to your witnesses. And as I said, don't argue or quarrel with your witnesses, because you will lose your temper, witness will lose your temper, and judge will scream on you. So never ever do that. It will create a bad situation for you. Now, as I said, don't ask similar questions repeatedly, because it will destroy your case completely. Uh, so I think that's much for the tips that I would like to give for cross examination thing.
I think you've summarized them pretty well, because from what you know about examining the witness and cross-examining the witness, this is actually a very short summary. And you know what, guys, we could actually have a separate session with Debashish where he talks specifically on examination and chief cross-examination, because that is going to be of the real benefit when it comes to trial advocacy competitions. But as far as Abhi is concerned, we are a bit out of time. I had so much hesitation stopping Debashish in between because he was speaking so well, and it was actually so important for you guys that you needed to know. Therefore, I am personally sorry for the time extension, but I really hope it helped. What he talked on examination chief and cross examination was actually very helpful. If you use these tips, if the order in which he commanded those questions while conducting the examination in chief or cross examinations, if you just follow that, that'll be a good head start for you if you are trying your hat at a trial advocacy competition. So I think, Devashish, we can conclude this session now. But just before we conclude, I have two short announcements. The first, and after these announcements, we'll take care of the questions which you guys are having. There were 2-3 questions, Devashish. I'm sure we can take care of them. So first of all, let me just share the screen to show you a banner for our courses and the discounted prices, because of course I am required to do that. So this is our course. One is regarding oral argumentation, which is of 1800, but you can get it for 1600 if you apply the coupon web 200. Similarly, the memorial making course, you can have it for 2000 if you use the coupon web 200. And the citation course, in which we have Blue Book 21st, 20th, and whatnot. We are just adding another modules regarding Chicago Manual of Citation and ILI. So you can, and these courses are going to benefit you a lot. Believe me, if you are in first or second year and you are just beginning to moot and research and draft, take help of these courses. They are priced really cheap compared to the other industry standards, and the quality is also very high. They have been rated very good. So if at all they could benefit you, I'll be more than happy to extend this help to you. Apart from this, the second announcement is that like this session, obviously this session was great, first of all, but we are also going to have another session. Just let me, just a second, guys. Yeah. So on 10th of April, guys, same time, 4 to 5, we'll have a session with the winners of Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College Moot Court Competition 2021. And they'll be speaking about their experience, their problem, their area of research which was concerned. So if any of you has interest, we'll be sharing the links on the groups again. So please be there and give them a listen. I hope that helps you again. So yes, I think I'm out of my job now. Devashish, we can take some questions. I'll just filter out the questions one by one. We'll proceed in the descending order. Namrata is asking, are we supposed to prepare an imaginary suitable version of story for defendant?
Yeah. So absolutely. Like as I said, you have to prepare your defense version. So sometimes moot court or trial advocacy competitions hosts give you defense witnesses statements, which you should always remember that they are not under 161, right? Police cannot record defense witnesses statements under 161. 161 can only be for prosecution witnesses, right? So you have to infer what those witnesses are saying and what a concrete theory or fortified theory that you can develop on the side of defense, which obviously will help you winning the case in favor of the accused, in addition to the loopholes that you have created against the prosecution case. Now, as you know, always it is important that you like find loopholes in prosecution case, and by only doing that you will win your case. But again, if you pose a defense theory, it will fortify your whole case, and it will obviously like persuade the court to give a judgment in your favor. So you have to prepare your independent defense theory on your own, and you have to like discuss it with teammates, and you have to frame them accordingly.
The next question is, all right, we'll come to the general tips and tricks in the end. NO6 negotiator, how can you suggest which trial advocacy competition a beginner should go for? Yeah, that's something you can address. So he wants to know any trial advocacy competition which a beginner should go for, and to which ones we can progress to in the future after gaining experience. So yeah, you could tell them about the trial advocacy competitions happening in India right now.
Yeah, there are like limited number of trial advocacy competitions happening currently in India, not because of COVID situation. It was also before that. There are not too many trial advocacy competitions. So for the beginning stage, you can start with Praveen Gandhi Law's trial advocacy competition, which is quite like informative, and they follow a strict trial format. But you will get to learn a lot from that trial advocacy competition, as I have also like participated in that competition, and they keep a session exclusively for the judges of that round to give you feedback, and they seriously give you intricate feedback. They will like tell you in which parts you have done wrong, which particular things you could have taken up to like fortify or make your arguments or make your like conduct of case a better. So you can try that particular Praveen Gandhi trial advocacy competition, and then NUSRL's trial advocacy competition is there. That is I feel that is also a proper trial format that they follow for a trial advocacy competition. And then Savita School of Law trial advocacy competition is there. Now there are a lot of trial advocacy competitions which there is also a Rajasthan University trial advocacy competition which you can take part as a beginner. But then if I say an experienced trial advocacy competition, that would be Surana and Surana trial advocacy competition, because that is the topmost or top-notch trial advocacy competition that happens throughout in India. In different regions also, there are 4 sectors: Western Zone, Eastern Zone, Northeastern, and Northern Zone, like that. I don't remember particularly. But there are 4 zones and 4 trial advocacy competitions that are hosted by Surana and Surana, and that is the most reputed trial advocacy competition which you can take as an experienced trial advocate or student advocate.
Obviously, we have very limited number, but from what I can see, trial advocacies are gaining traction now.
Yes,
it's gaining a lot of traction. So we are having a good number of moods now. Because at my time, I don't even remember a single mood, or there were 1 or 2 moods in trial advocacy. Anyway, so Lakhan is asking: do we accuse a witness for false statement, or do we suggest that he or she is falsely testifying?
Yes, absolutely. At the end of your closing statement, if you have proved in your cross-examination that this particular witness is a total false witness, he is a tutored witness, you can say, then you can just suggest the court to initiate a initiate a proceeding for providing false statement under oath before the court. Like, you cannot say false statement or complete false thing after taking oath on keeping your hand on Gita, right? So you can never do that, obviously, and there is a penal offense in IPC also. I don't remember, 292 or 294 or something of IPC. So you can obviously find out that it is like in between there only. So yes, you can accuse.
So the next question is by Saurabh. He's asking: is the trial problem? We've actually addressed this question while you were speaking. Just a different perspective which he wants. Is the trial problem admissible in the court? Like, if there is a clearly given in the trial problem that a particular offense is committed by any person, then how can we save the accused?
Now, Saurabh, see, no trial proposition can give that this particular accused person have committed these particular crimes, because that will make whole of the process a futile thing, because there would not be anything to prove or dispute, right?
Actually,
but Yeah, but there are some trial advocacy competitions wherein they will give 2-3 pages of facts, and at the end they will mention that these are admitted facts, and you cannot dispute them. So you have to like stick to those facts particularly, and then all other facts you have to like deal upon during your cross examination, chief examination, and all. So you have to see the trial proposition and rules of the competition for that.
Devashish, do you have any tips for the students when it comes to virtual trial advocacy competitions?
Okay, so yeah, there are a few virtual trial advocacy competitions going on also. So first thing, as I already said, after reading down your facts, you should straight away go to the commentaries, right? Suppose if your moot proposition is dealing with Indian Penal Code, CRPC, and evidence only, then you can go to Ratan Lal and Dheeraj Lal, or any other commentary which is available with you. Like you have to contact with a local lawyer or lawyer of a high court, and visit his chamber or ask permission for taking his book, and like take pictures from them, or read like return them within 2-3 days. So that is the first thing you can do during this virtual times. And then secondly, if you have SCC online, Manupatra, or any other online resources with you, then it will like it makes your task much easier to find case laws and reports or documents on your particular trial problem. So you can refer to them. If it is not available with you, ask your friends for that particular thing, or ask advocates whom you know who can give access to SCC or Manupatra for a shorter period of time, in which you can research about your trial proposition. So these two are basic things which you can use during these virtual times. Rest all the things are like will be there, be it virtual trial advocacy or be it like physical one.
So we'll take the last question. Priyanshi, your question is not clear to me. What extraordinary thing can be done in case of ICC? Do you mean by International Criminal Court? Because that's not trial, Abhi. So Khushi is asking, can we ask a leading question by questioning their qualification so as to make the opponent less confident?
It is a situation you have to clarify that whether you are asking leading question in chief examination or cross examination. In cross examination, yes, absolutely, you can ask that particular question if it is relevant to your case. Now, in chief examination, you can ask this. I couldn't understand your particular question. I presume that you meant the particular degree or particular qualification that person is having. So there are certain exceptions to leading questions which you can like ask in chief examination stage. So there are few exceptions, like you can ask introductory questions in chief examination in the form of leading questions. You can ask questions which are directly relevant or directly related to a particular witness. As you said, qualification of me, you can directly ask that whether you are do you have a degree of BA LLB, do you have a degree of MBBS and all. You can ask that directly in chief examination. These are certain exceptions, but you cannot ask every question in leading form in chief examination.
Got it. Guys, I'm so sorry. There were 3-4 more questions, but we are out of time and the session is about to end any time within 1-2 minutes. So I just want to use this time to thank Debashish for being here, and whoever is here, please be sure we are going to hack Debashish. We are going to keep him with us for the trial advocacy webinars, because as you guys have already noticed, he has a plethora of knowledge when it comes to trial advocacy. I have no hesitation in saying that, no two thoughts when it comes to that. So we are going to conduct another session when it comes to, as I was saying, a cross examination and examination, and he's going to give you tips which no one else can, because the experience which he has needs to be valued like this. So again, thank you so much, Debashish. This session was actually very, very beneficial, not only for the students but for me as well. How else can I thank you? Thank you for being here. And I've known you for a long time. You have done exceptionally well when it comes to moot courts. You have done exceptionally well when it comes to this trial advocacy and interning or litigating. So I really hope all the best to you for your future endeavors. You know that. So thanks a lot for being here, Debashish. If you just want to say something, you can.
Yeah. So the like I am really grateful to Rasnendra sir for like having me in today's evening for deliberating upon this particular trial advocacy competitions, and it was a great honor for me. Like a fifth year student is delivering upon this particular thing to all the students, and obviously all the all the appraisals or and all the praises goes to Memo Pandits and Rasnendra sir and Anand sir for hosting me today and giving me this platform for sharing my views and experiences with all the attendees here. So it was great like having with you this session.
Fantastic. So we can end the session now. And everyone, he's your senior, so you can just hit him up on Instagram. Devashish, are you on Instagram?
Yes.
I am going to follow you today, and all of you, please follow him. Hit him on LinkedIn so he can help you in trial advocacy competitions in future. So, all right. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending the session, for being a patient host, and for not unmuting yourself because you were not allowed to do so. So, anyway, thanks a lot. We can end this session. Thank you, Devashish. See you soon. And all the best to all of you. See you soon in the next session. Next session, 10th April, 4 to 5, there's a mood show. All right? Sure. All right, Devashish. Bye bye. Bye, guys. See you all. Bye bye.